Hello and welcome back, and that is right. Today we want to return to the subject of the ZimaCube Kickstarter NAS campaign. It's got about a day left on the clock, and I know there are still people wondering, one, whether they want to back this campaign before it closes, two, whether they, as existing backers, are thinking about jettisoning away from this project at the 11th hour, and of course there are going to be those of you watching this that are just wanting to monitor a product in development because you were never going to enter into this in the crowdfunding stages, but you want to see what happens towards the end, and then maybe if it reaches full retail, hop on the bandwagon yourself. And that's what today's video is. I'm going to summarize everything at the 11th hour about this campaign that we know, that has been confirmed, that we've seen, what we haven't seen at times, and ultimately help you decide whether this is worth jumping on right now. And although we've already done several videos on this, right from the teardown where they sent us the unit, all the way down to when we were looking at noise testing, some of the software testing there in the background, again, all of this on a pre-production prototype unit, this video we are focusing on the huge number of updates that they have published. I think there's 9, technically 8 if you want to look at it a certain way. We'll talk about that later on, with a lot of backers' questions being answered and with a lot of demos being shown by the brand. And we're going to go through it in as quick a form way as we can. And as you can see on the right hand side of the screen there, what we've also done is I kind of put together a master list there of all the things we've learned about this and all of these at the time at the end of the campaign. I'll update this tomorrow with the final numbers and what we're going to be doing at the end of the crowdfunding. So not just when they're doing the fundraising, but right the way to fulfillment, see how many of these points they stuck to at the end of the campaign, and hopefully judge this at the end as a success or a failure. Now, one of the things I didn't go into a lot of detail on before we get into the updates themselves, in previous videos I did touch on there were multiple options available, but looking now with only a day or so left on this campaign, one of the things that really surprised me was that the cheaper N100 model is not the most popular option. The early bird reward versions, they're basically cheaper entry into this. And again, bear in mind, again, just as Kickstarter say, we are still talking about crowdfunding. This is still a product in development. It has to be said that given that normally with crowdfunding campaigns that we've seen in the past, not just your Storaxes, but other ones, generally one of the big appeals to a lot of users is that lower price point, and this device arrived on the scene with a slightly higher price point than some of the other NASs I've seen on crowdfunding. Nevertheless, I can see that the N100 version, the early bird, sold somewhere in the region of 300 or so units, with nearly 700 still left to go. But when you look at the i5 version, the more expensive one I might add, rocking out that $899 price mark in the early bird, they've clearly sold a lot more of those. And the same goes when you scroll down even further and look at the integrated graphics card version of this device, and we see the one that arrives with the graphics card included, they've sold, 126 of those. And again, that's the one rocking out the gate at $1,599. So I was really surprised just how many more of that Pro Series version rocked out the gate when I've seen a lot of, and again, I was trying not to allude to a Storax too much, but there is going to be comparisons to this next year, not just by me, but by others. I will say that I'm kind of surprised that this the N100, which is Pentium Celeron new family renaming strategy by Intel, didn't sell anywhere near as well on this in terms of backer pledges as that i5 version. So make of that what you will, but that's kind of a nice mark of confidence, I think, from users that are going in for a penny, in for a pound. Now, getting into the updates themselves, I mentioned that there was going to be 9 updates, but really 8. The reason being, that first update, that's your standard, cookie cutter type one, where it is a case of a very low goal and an exceptionally high amount garnered there. Again, I think it's good they're at least specking out the idea and trying to see what the gauged interest is, but nevertheless, we're going to completely ignore update 1 for the record. But update 2 was one of the earliest signs I thought there was a nice promising start for this campaign, and still right now I think it's one of the strongest entrances to a lot of crowdfunding campaigns we talked about on the channel. Why? Because it was the campaign managers highlighting specific inquiries very early doors in this campaign by users to do with the setup there. So with regards to how the 10 GBE is delivered, how the GPU card is going to be utilized there. When it came to third-party compatibility of third-party OS. All of these are very early questions that came up in the comment section of the campaign and established very early doors. And indeed, when it comes to the lanes on the PCIe distribution on this, in one of the later updates, this is actually explored in a decent amount of detail, I would say, for so early in the campaign. Moreover, stretch goals are covered later on, and tax and shipping was again one of those questions that those very familiar with crowdfunding in most forms, when you are shipping products that are predominantly being built in the East, or specifically China, but other regions as well, you do find that tax is always a difficult point of answering for a lot of campaigns, because one, you're talking about the globe and different taxing rules and import and export, but also how that's going to affect the pricing for a lot of users when it goes out the gate. It's not the days of an eBay envelope priced at 99p, honest governor, it is. Now, immediately they highlighted they will take on the tax. Now, again, we are still talking about crowdfunding. We're talking about a gaseous product that may not exist, but still nonetheless, at least they committed to that right down on the first official update. And again, going into as much detail as distribution, where it was going to take place from, and updates on the motherboard. And this was that version 2 motherboard that we talked about in one of our videos here. It's just started raining on the roof. Can you hear that? Now, moving forward from that update, they started showing some of the showcases of the performance of this. Now, again, a good sign from them. They didn't make these unlisted. They didn't make these backer only. I'm not backing this project. This is a project that, I'm communicating with the devs there because they've sent me a prototype unit, but I'm not backing it. I'm seeing as much as anyone else, whether I was a backer or not. And they talk about the hardware of the device. This is that N100, not dissimilar to my own, but I ripped it to pieces. And then on top of that, some of the disk tests there of the device being put together within the software overview. And finally, and all of these will be linked in the description, the transcoding and Plex performance there running on that system. Lots of information shown off in update 2. They also went as far as to talk about some of the performance internally of different drives, and then of course, as this was that N100 version, some of that performance they're limited onto Gen 3 ×1 slots. Looked like a lot of users were holding out for that i5 version. Again, in for a penny, in for a pound mentality. Totally makes sense. Now, when they talked about a lot more of the stretch goals that are integrated there, there's more of these on later updates. But one of the things that I was kind of surprised by was that 10G upgrade serving as something of a stretch goal. I was under the impression that the 10G port had been integrated by default on the i5 model. Now, I've since looked back on that, and again, I looked at that wrong. It's actually 1 and 3 ports there. So I'm going to double check my notes and see if that is something that's changed in the early development and some of the slides that I had. But still, nonetheless, I'm not going to question that too much, although, $2 million, you can get a hoodie. I don't care. Now, update 4 is where we saw a lot more on the actual day-to-day performance of these devices. Now, again, this was just the M100. Large developments on that i5 model happened pretty much from the update after this one. There was the odd hint to it, but in this one we saw not only a detailed guide on the local performance on the local area network and the setup of the device, all communicating their data back and forth there in the background on SSH. We also saw a lot more performance testing, network demos, as well as 4K transcoding performance in a lot more detail there. And finally there at the end, a reveal of some of the Zima OS. And that was when, unlike a lot of the kind of Zima board and Zima blade, this is their own operating system they're working on here, dedicated to the Zima system there, that's got a larger functionality on many things. But moreover, the thing that a lot of us are waiting for is that storage management, because, and again, I'll show this more at the end of the video, and this is the latest version of that Zima OS. It's still not at that point where they've integrated RAID into it. You can test this out. There's lots of ways in which you can do it. Hopefully that will be linked in the description below. We are running on 4.9.4, the current version in beta, currently available on the 12th of the 12th. Apart from here, when we go into the storage manager, that RAID functionality is still yet to be introduced. They've still got that merging function, but it's nowhere near as user-friendly as that of most of the storage managers from other brands out there. These things take time, I know. But moreover, just a nice, simple RAID handling and ZFS-based support stuff on there. that is the kind of stuff that we're still yet to see. But nevertheless, they were going into some of the details about some of the GUI redesign there, some of the features and functionality that can be rocked in with that RAID support, and ultimately what they're hoping to achieve with this setup on this system. So overall, with the feature set at that point, and I don't believe much else has been added with the exception there of the Thunderbolt and Unified Management. We'll talk about those later on. We've at the very least got the support of the baseline stuff, but we're hoping to see there right at the end RAID support. But I'm a bit sad that that is something that has not taken precedence very early doors as a storage professional myself. So moving in to update 5. Update 5 was where we saw the i5 model, that 1235U, start to really make some moves, make some noise, let people know it exists. And do you know what? Again, I'm very surprised that it's taken till update 5 for that, because although we are still talking, if we were to go back to that list, a relatively short period of time. There's that November 3rd update, and we go to that one at December 11th. So again, we're talking a little over a month. There's a lot of updates there, but still nonetheless, given how well the i5 has been backed rather than the N100, I'm surprised given the larger slant towards the N100 coverage, because that was obviously the device they were working on first, and the redeveloped board, and then kind of making sure that it all worked within the same case. But still nonetheless, there's more information from the i5 from this moment forward. You had that new board they were working on there that obviously needed modifications over what we've seen of the N100 model due to the reallocation of lanes, and of course the distribution of those ports and connections. So, favouring out USB 3.2 Type-C and bringing in Thunderbolt 4 connectivity there. Now, the PCIe allocation was a very early question, not only on their own Kickstarter pages, but also in the comments of my videos, because a lot of users were just questioning the PCIe lane allocation across this architecture there, where they're going to be using PCI switches, how much of it, chipset allocation and more. And to their credit, in this update, they do go into more detail about those allocation of those lanes on both the 1235 i5 model and of course that N100 model. They're talking a lot more about the utilization of that Thunderbolt 5 and how that doesn't impact it on the PCIe, which is very interesting, I will say. Now, from that, they also went into how they're looking into, presumably after the campaign is finished, other optional extras to add. Now, this again is fairly common. We've seen it in other Kickstarter campaigns. We've seen it in Kickstarter server campaigns. I kind of hope they don't go down the road of integrating storage and saying, do you want to include hard drives or SSD? Because that way leads to awkwardness. Again, I hate to refer to them again, but Storaxa, one of the things that's got people's goat a little bit on that crowdfunding campaign was that a lot of users were buying storage. They were buying drives, buying SSDs, which makes a lot of sense if you don't want to be overly technically hassled and you want the device to arrive with that stuff. Great stuff. But the longer the campaign takes to arrive, the fluctuations in the pricing of that storage media present themselves, and often it can be better to just hold out on a system that's going to take months to arrive and buy the media then. And I think there are users that backed that other campaign at Storaxa that are feeling that a little bit there. So although they've gone for the baseline SSD upgrade for the OS, which is a slightly different kettle of fish rather than, expandable storage, I will say I'm glad they've stuck to just the options of PCIe upgrades with which they're debating there for upgraded slots, upgraded network connectivity, and an external GPU box. Kind of surprised by, but, sure, whatever. But still, nonetheless, I'm going to be interested to see how people engage with that. The one I found quite intriguing was that maintenance card there to be introduced as well, because I think that is when you're tippy-toeing into the enterprise, and frankly, tippy-toeing into enterprise is not something I would say in conjunction with a crowdfunding campaign, but each to their own. Now, Update 6 continued the performance benchmarks, but also introduced some third-party software as well in their testing regimen and capabilities of this system. Now, again, fair play to them. all published on their own official channel, all public, all accessible by everyone. First and foremost, an unraid installation, and this is something they were very clear on early doors on this system. Although they're including the Zima OS, you're not bound by it. You can still pop in any third-party OS you want. Just bear in mind that, of course, they're not going to install it for you. That's something you're going to have to do with your own license there. TrueNAS and Unraid, I think we've got some real good hardware to play with here. And once you utilize those third-party OSs, then you really are going into surface level ZFS, support ZFS, and incredible container deployment. Moving forward, that, then add the power consumption test, something I've still yet to do on my side. I did noise tests, but I didn't include the power testing there. And again, I wanted to wait until the full OS comes out, but maybe I should think about doing that a little bit sooner. We'll have to wait and see. But with the power consumption testing there, then utilization of using the system for stable diffuse and AI image creation tool there, working as a deployed container. They went ahead and just showed just how long it took the system to generate these AI images in stable diffuse there. And finally, utilizing it for video editing there with the system, with deployment of, you know, normal photo editing suites directly on the system, connected as a mounted drive. Nice and simple. Just showing people what the capabilities of the system are. For those that are wearing NAS and servers, not the biggest deal, and certainly, you know, more the network doing the heavy lifting than the very idea that this system could uniquely be connected to. But still, nonetheless, it's good to see that fluidity, and it did perform very well in those tests. Overall, another solid update. Update 7 brought with it probably minor details compared with the others, and it focused predominantly on those stretch goals. The integration of a mesh fabric panel for some of those ventilation areas on the system, because there was concerns, not just, again, on the crowdfunding pages, but during my teardown, about the filtration of dust in all of those vents, front, back, and sides. And again, the integration of that, fairly standard stuff, and of course the 10 GBE connection mentioned earlier on, and they're saying they're integrating that even though they didn't quite hit that 1,500,000 target yet. But I will say again, I kind of thought 10 GBE was going to be integrated on that architecture as standard. I just didn't know whether it was going to be native on the board, or which it is going to be, or if it was going to be via a PCIe. But still, at least they've committed to that in that 10 GBE and 2.5 gig, presumably because of the lane allocation. But apart from that, fairly low key for that update. Now, update 8 was a lot more of a return to form. We saw a lot more performance tests, and I will say the one test I wanted to see, unfortunately they didn't show. I only talked about this, so hopefully that will get remedied in another update. I will say that the test they did show, I was quite happy with. First and foremost, they were showing off that new 1235U Mobo there, the system in operation there, sort of the layout of the components, comparable to that of the N100, but obviously the higher capabilities of that i5 processor and the extra lanes that it brings are better utilized here. Although I think I would have liked to have seen a larger fan, or at least a better angle at that fan, to see just how that cooling is going to be working out on that more aggressive CPU by comparison to that of the N100. Next up was installing VMware on the ZimaCube NAS there, and again, that's not utilized as a container or anything like that, as, you know, localized object deployment. It is installing it flat out on the system as a baseline OS there. And they went through a whole guide walking you through exactly how to do it, working absolutely fine there. And finally, they showed off there the integration of cloud storage, and that was one of those features that we talked about in one of the earlier updates there, when they were talking about the capabilities of it and some of the new features that were getting added there. So again, it was nice to see the integration of that cloud storage, something that we already did show off in our previous video when we were talking about the OS there, and when you go into the storage manager and going into the file manager and integrating a lot of those cloud storage providers, just how straightforward they were to add there. You can see they're on the left hand side of the screen just over there. But I mean, apart from that, within that update, that was really it. And again, we did look at anything else that was going on from Zimmer at the time, and it looks like in those final day or so left of the campaign, things are looking quite promising. But again, we are still talking about a product in development. We are still talking about crowdfunding. And furthermore on that, that brings us into update number 9, where they're talking a lot more about the final 2 days. And again, there's just over a day right now, talking about a lot of the testing that's going on in the background, the communication that's gone on in the background. And then on top of that, the production of those cases. They've got the molds completed. They're going to be rolling out into production of those cases in larger scale as it goes into mass production. And they talked a lot more about where they're going to be going after the campaign has concluded. Now, I will say, the things that I would have liked to have seen that were not covered in those updates, number 1 was actual testing of the Thunderbolt connection, as they mentioned in one of those previous updates about the testing of that Thunderbolt connection there, and they got 24.1 gigabits per second. So again, that's 2,410, again, give or take calculations, megabytes per second there. They talked about that running connected to a Mac. I would have liked to have seen that on a lot of those videos, because I think that's going to be very useful for those users that are going to be utilizing, well, I mute that sound there in the background, how many users that are going to be directly interfacing this to this device for editing, and then potentially using the 10 GB as a network pass-through. But overall, barring that and the fact that the RAID functionality and a lot more of the advanced features of that software are still yet to be kind of proven through outside of the updates that are left on that list of the software, I will say I'm happy with what I'm seeing here. And although I'm not backing this campaign personally, because I've already been sent that prototype to play with, I'm quietly optimistic there. Now, I think a lot of users that are looking at that i5 model, these are the ones with the most to lose. Let's be honest, they're the ones, some of which have included a graphics card. These are the ones that have spent the extra dosh. These are the ones that are getting the more heavy-duty unit. And those are also the users, coincidentally, who are the ones that are obviously getting the bigger saving if and when this thing hits RRP. Make of that what you will. But I will say, based on everything I've seen in those updates, based on the responses they've had with third-party users, based on such communications such as this troubleshooting forum thread here by Icewell, talking to users with the beta and finding out ways to improve it, things that are right, things that are wrong, they're doing the right thing in terms of communication, I think, being very open about a lot of their testing and a lot of the feature set that they're working on right now, particularly with the PCIe layout as well. So right now, I think this could be the thing that we're looking for in terms of crowdfunded NAS. It's still not completed. You know, it's still early doors. We're still talking about crowdfunding, product and developer, etc. But I like what I'm seeing here, and I will be continuing to monitor this in 2024, and of course comparing the finished product against what we are seeing here, because we still want to see more of that AI functionality with that graphics card there. We still want to see more on the performance over the Thunderbolt. We want to see more temperature tests more than power tests, but again, these are all things that I think are going to be happening probably after the crowdfunding campaign has ended, because I can't see them rocking that out with 24 hours to go. Maybe they'll prove me wrong by the end of this video. Let's find out. But this has been where things are at with 24 hours to go with that ZimaCube NAS. There's links in the description to all of the resources I talked about today, as well as that link to the project down there as well. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time.